So there will be escalations, no question, including this possible terror attack in Crimea or several terror attacks in Crimea and long-range missiles striking inside the Russian Federation. They need to provoke Russia to do something. The problem is Russia won't be provoked. Look, they were provoked with an attack on 1/3 of their nuclear strategic assets, and they did not respond accordingly. They are always postponing the response because when the real response comes, it's going to be something off the charts. And the Russians prefer that. Coup de grace, as we say here in France, the coup that destroys your enemy for good. So it's fascinating to see, but when you understand the Russian mentality, you understand this waiting and preparing and not overreacting. And it's very hard for many of us, especially all of us who are products of the West, to understand that. But after a while, when you understand how they think, it makes sense from their point of view, totally. And the way that, why this is not a war. No, it's just a military operation, a police operation. And now a police operation mixed with a counter-terrorist against a bunch of terrorists. The real war is not this one. The real war is becoming, we have to be prepared for that one. This one is easy. And what the Brazilians have already started, at least, they are receiving inquiries from especially Africa and Asia, new potential customers to these products that Brazil exports. What is being formed is something like this, but it's not there yet, which should be for a while now. This is a counter-terrorist operation. The problem is, if you get the heads of the terrorist snake, who's going to be next? And that explains why the Russians are still refraining from Oreshniking Bankova in Kiev. Okay, who's going to be next? And we don't want Zaluzhny. Zaluzhny is the Brits' man, and Britain is officially at war against Russia. Whichever way you try to describe it, London is at war with Moscow. So all these variables are playing every day, but we already know the long picture, what's going to be. This NATO war against Russia in 5 years, roughly. So the Russians have to calculate everything towards, okay, what's going to happen within these next 5 years? And the gradualist approach coming to the point when NATO finally declares war on Russia, Russia can destroy all major NATO basic nodes in half an hour, which they can. Obviously, those idiots, this idiot generals in the UK, reformed or retired or otherwise, they have no clue about that. But Russia can destroy everything, including this military burst at Rotterdam airport with a few Sarmat, Zircon, and Oreshniks. So the Russians are looking at that when we get to that point. So that's the problem. That's the huge problem. So Brazil now is facing an existential threat. To put it on a BRICS context, Russia, China, and Iran figured out these past, I would say, three months especially, that they are facing an existential threat individually and as BRICS members vis-a-vis the empire. And now Brazil is part of this group. India is different because India, and this is something that was heavily discussed on the sidelines of the BRICS summit in Rio, they still don't know where they are and they still don't know where they're going. And they're still hedging their bets. Brazil, to a certain extent, the Brazilian ruling classes, they don't even hedge their bets. They are Atlanticists, and many of them are fifth columnists, straight out. But now, what Trump is doing, and the system is doing, and imbeciles like Lindsey Graham are vociferating, and uber imbeciles like Tutti Frutti or Rudy, NATO Secretary General, they are threatening Brazil directly. So that's another ball game. So now Brazil now is playing the main stakes. So that makes the situation much more complicated. We're going to have to wait for August 1st to see if these 50% tariffs will start. The Brazilian response, which under reciprocity law would be 50% back on American products, we can manage, as they are managing, right? But you said it's getting more and more dangerous by the minute because there will be, I would say, a string of escalations from now on. There's no question about that. Especially when you have in power in NATO, in the UK, in political leaderships of different NATO nations, and in Brussels, people of this quality. And now I'm being diplomatic. They don't even qualify as having any quality. So we can expect the worst. The
Do you
Russians don't want that. But if they are eventually forced to do something like this, they will go for it, but not in terms of blood. It's in terms of amputating NATO's military capability, which is the Russians could do that in less than a day, really. So that's why the problem is if the cost for the Russian civilian population starts to become very high. Don't forget, for the moment, the cost in terms of Russian casualties, it's already very high. And this is a subject that is extremely sensitive to discuss when you are in Russia. I saw that for myself, and in many episodes, I was trying to write something or publish something that I knew, oh no, this is a red line, because it would be considered an attack on national security. And I understand their motivations and I understand their logic, of course. If you conquer territory, excellent. Demilitarization, which is working, and then long term, which is be much more complicated, denazification. But for that, they need a new government in Kiev. They are following the machinations of the empire and the Brits, and now especially with being openly leaked that the next leader of Ukraine is going to be Zaluzhny. We knew that a year and a half ago that it was Zaluzhny because he left Kiev. He became ambassador of Ukraine in London, where he's being trained, I would say 10 hours a day at least, day after day by MI6 to be their man in Kiev. Everybody knew that. It's ridiculous. Now it's in the open because now it's even published by American mainstream media. So we all know where this is going. And obviously the Russians know better than anybody where this is going. So brings us back to the question. India is already very close to Russia and wants to get closer with Brazil. So we still remain with the number one issue to be solved, possibly in the next few months, which is India-China. And the only ones who can solidify finally the relationship are the Russians. And it's in their interest and it's in BRICS' interest to solidify that. So let's see how it works. And for instance, many Chinese academics, I was listening to them say directly, which is something the Chinese always go through metaphors, images, historical analogies. In this case, they were saying the trust between China and India is lost. That's very serious. So how do you recover this trust? The only ones who can make it happen or accelerate this happening are the Russians. So let's see. The Russians will have a crucial role in this next less than a year and a half. The summit in BRICS summit in India will be probably end of next year in India, to put them on the same table and say, look, we are all being attacked now by the same player. So are we going to get together for good or what? Are you in or out? So the decision is with people backing Modi, not necessarily Modi himself, but the people backing him. But for the moment, the Kremlin judges that the price being paid by the Russian military, okay, I'm talking about military casualties, is acceptable. And to put it bluntly, the price being paid by the Russian civilian population is acceptable. But if this goes over a red line that none of us know where it is, it's probably in Putin's mind. There's got to be a figure, a number somewhere. Then all bets are off. We're not there yet. But just to give an example, imagine a false flag in Moscow with lots of civilian casualties in the capital. We are on the way to this ultra red line, right? If we have something like this, the people who ordered this false flag, they better start running now. but we're not there yet. So this calibration game is very complex for Putin and the Security Council. On the other side, we know now there are no rules. When you have the Chancellor of Germany openly calling to strike Russian Federation assets inside Russia, this is already a declaration of war by itself. And these stupid generals and the head of NATO, you name it. They are losing, they never had any measure. But this is what happens when you launch a military operation without thinking of possible outcomes. And after a little over 3 years, you stare humiliation in your face, but utter, thorough humiliation. The whole NATO machine humiliated by Russia. German UK sort of treaty, which is basically a German UK treaty to attack Russia. But it's not the only one. There will be others. I would say from now on, there will be interlocking intra-European treaties with only a single objective: prepare the war against Russia, the hot war against Russia, which in NATO speak, in NATO internal documents that we had access to, in NATO leaks, it's going to be around 2030. And now they're openly saying, no, not openly, but almost openly saying that it's within the next 5 years. Okay, some of my notes here that I wrote, and I'm sure our audience is going to love it. I wrote my notes on a Beijing Club letterhead. It's one of my favorite new letterheads now. Very few people are paying attention to what's happening in Rotterdam, Nima, and all our audience. Rotterdam is probably Europe's biggest port, much bigger than Antwerp, in fact. It is one of the ports, if the Belt and Road was fully flowing towards Europe, in the minds of the Chinese, the number one port in the north of Europe would be Rotterdam, and in the south, Venice. Rotterdam now is fully being prepared to be also a military port. This is essential. Rotterdam is enormous, so they are setting out what will be at least 30% of the surface of Rotterdam to be NATO military installations, preparing for this war in 2030. In fact, this is going to be much, much worse because it involves nuclear weapons and it involves superimposed wars that the Americans are already unleashing everywhere using their vassal NATO. And these wars are essentially against BRICS. So it's geoeconomic, geopolitical, and military. And that's why it's so dangerous. So if you have local elites, there are mostly Atlanticists, fifth columnists. They don't care about their nation, and they care about their own personal profit, preferably abroad. They don't care about the local population. They only care about being accepted as lowly members of the ruling classes in the global north, the members of the BRICS members and the BRICS partners as well. We don't know how India is going to manage all that. It's too early to tell. But even the fact that India was there and Modi was in ecstasies, the way he was received in Brazil by Lula, etc., and he's proposing a strategic partnership and all that. So obviously, the Americans timed that too as a message to India as well. Oh yeah, you're dreaming of a strategic relationship with Brazil. You're going to be hit hard, just like we're hitting them hard. Trump's own words. This ends up filtering back to levers of power in the Kremlin as well. And in India, the same thing, especially the fact that India now is, in a sense, getting closer to some of the BRICS. And the only thing that registers in his mind is that they are trying to de-dollarize. So they are anti-American. So I have to hit them hard. Because first of all, they are all Atlanticists, they are pro-Americans. The dumbest ones, the new money, the agro-business, etc., their idea of making it in life is a house in Florida or an apartment in New York or a ranch in Texas or a mix of all three. They speak horrible English to start with. They don't even know how to express themselves in English. But it's new money. They are wealthy. They have levers of power in Brasilia and in the capitals, in the big capitals. They have levers of power in Sao Paulo Business Center. But how can you convince these people that the future for them and for Brazil is global markets, not necessarily the American market, or not to become an export commodity power only to the US or to Europe? And Europeans, they look at Brazil, it's in that deal that nobody wants, the EU-Mercosur deal. Nobody wants it in Brazil. Of course, the agro think they're going to make a big deal out of it. And in Europe, especially here in Europe, they don't want it because we're going to suffer competition from low-class South American products. So the future of Brazil as a global South player is global South markets all over. West Asia, Africa, Southeast Asia. That was relatively peaceful. Johnson Hung from NVIDIA, he knows that, but he still needs to sell these chips. So obviously he pressured the Trump system. Look, do something. I need to sell these chips. Otherwise, I'm going down. I have this huge inventory. I need to get rid of these chips. And why this happened in the first place, Nima? Because the Chinese started to impose heavy restrictions on the export of rare earth to the US. And then you hit where it hurts. You hit the American auto industry and you hit the American aerospatial industry. That's it. So and that's the difference between Russia and China and Brazil. We're getting there. We're getting to Brazil. Russia is a military nuclear superpower. You don't mess with that. There will always be responses and responses on the terrain. China is an economic superpower. You don't mess with that. The responses are geoeconomic and in trade and in exports. And the fact that China can export to anywhere they want. They don't need the American market. Brazil is a much more complicated situation because now Brazil is under all-out trade geoeconomic war. So it will depend, and it's not Lula per se. Of course, it's Lula's decisions, but the Lula government. And I think you and a great deal of our audience know very well some of these people who are in positions of power in the Lula government. And they are not exactly Einsteins, are they? Trump doesn't know anything about foreign policy anywhere in the global South. He still doesn't know what BRICS is. Can I give you probably the best quote of these past few days? I'm going to quote Trump verbatim, starting now. When I heard about this group from BRICS, so it's a group from BRICS, it's not the BRICS group. 6 countries basically. So he doesn't even know how many are BRICS and BRICS partners. I hit them very hard. And if they ever really form in a meaningful way, so according to Trump, BRICS is not even formed. It will end very quickly, I'll tell you. They won't be gone very long. I don't think they'll even do it. Do it means, in his mind, in his mind, the only thing that registers is this group of 6 or whatever, unformed, blah, 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 is de-dollarizing, and this is anti-American. This is the only thing that registers in Trump's mind. I don't think they'll even do it. They're virtually afraid to me. And he didn't even construct the phrase correctly. It would be, they're virtually afraid of me. He said, they're virtually afraid to me. So to him, personally, all of the BRICS are afraid. So this is how he sees it. It's very telling because as much as it's horribly constructed, a 5-year-old will construct this train of thought better than Trump. But it's all there. It proves that he has absolutely no clue what BRICS is all about. But it's still a bit far compared to China. That's the difference. But at the same time, when you are in Iran, you feel that you are in a sovereign power. And the way Iran deals with all these challenges and so much pressure from all across the West, and they resist. It is extremely impressive. Nobody knows for the moment. For the moment, it's only speculation. Don't underestimate the formation and the consolidation of this triangle. Extremely dangerous in every aspect. And they have found the perfect president of the United States to, okay, go ahead, do anything you want. So another open question. Will he one day wake up and have, I would say, 30 seconds of introspection, which in his case is already like a trip to the Milky Way? Wow, this lobby is burying my presidency, which is already doing it now. But can you imagine in a few months from now or before the midterms, end of next year in the US, when he'll look at the numbers and he'll see that his presidency is being buried? Is he going to change a track in how he deals and how he's manipulated by this lobby? Probably not. Things will continue to do the same. He will continue to do the same things. Because in his mind, he'll be thinking about what? His mind only thinks in terms of striking a deal. It's a mafioso kind of mafia. Oh, very nice thing you have here. Pete, if something happens to it, okay, let me propose a way for you to deal with it, and nothing will happen to what you have. This is the way the mafia thinks. And this is the way he thinks because he learned to think like this from the New Jersey, New York mafia. We're going to build this fantastic trade corridor with Israel in the middle, serviced by Saudi Arabia and Emirates on both sides. This is going to be between Europe on one end and India on the other end. Israel will be in the middle. Does that remind anybody of World War I and World War II? Yes, it does, because it's the same shit all over again. So that's what you mentioned about the BlackRock German Central. That's where he fits in. That's where this Anglo-German treaty, we can tell it, fits in. That's where the militarization of Rotterdam port fits in. That's where the 1 trillion euro budget for NATO fits in. And that's where this interconnection of interests will keep. And don't forget, very important, the European Union machinery and the European Commission machinery, which is run by you know who, those two harpies, the toxic Medusa and the Estonian batshit crazy, undefinable leader of the foreign policy of 450 million European citizens, voters, taxpayers. So it's all coming together, and it's already coming together now. So if now we already know and we can identify the players, we can identify where the money is coming from and where the money is going to and all that, of course, the Russians know this much better than any of us. So the Russians are preparing themselves for this war. It's not what's going on in Ukraine now. This is the starter. The Russians are managing the starter at the moment, the Russian way, as we all know. If you understand the Russian mentality, you know that this is the way that they do wars. Attrition, little by little. It's not about conquering territory. So should we expect the Indian ruling classes to be learning from Russia, China, and Iran, especially these past 3 months? That's an open question. Let's leave it at that for the moment. It's an open question. But for instance, something it struck me a lot because I heard from different Chinese academics talking about BRICS. They were saying maybe we should start considering the other eyes on BRICS. And they were talking openly about BRICS. And guess what? Iran and Indonesia, not India. And don't forget, Iran and Indonesia are full members of BRICS. They're not partners. They are on the same status as India. And the Chinese are looking at Iran and Indonesia. Yes, these are sovereign nations. We can do a lot of business with them. We are on the same wavelengths. They are on the table. They are our equals. So India, if they don't start acting in their own Indian interests, they will lose power in the BRICS table. They will be excluding themselves out. So once again, this is an open question. Are they aware of it in India? So they are up to something in Crimea. There's no question about that. And if that happens this summer, then we'll be approaching the Oreshnik moment, right? So Nima, it's getting hotter by the day. So in China, Trump was forced to back down. He knew from the beginning that this was a no-go, considering the response by the Chinese already in, when was it? April. I was there. When I was in Shanghai in April, for instance, I could follow the Chinese response live from Shanghai. And we could tell, in talking to our Chinese friends, we could tell that China is not the China of 10, 15, 20 years ago. Now they are self-confident enough to tell the Americans, oh yeah, bring it on. We're waiting for you. We don't care. Bring everything you have. Throw everything you have against us. And what happened the past few days? The authorization by the Trump system to NVIDIA to sell H20 chips to China. What does that mean, essentially? Means that NVIDIA has zillions of chips that they need to sell by all means necessary, and the only market that can absorb these chips is China. Does China need these chips? No, they don't. Why? Because Huawei is already at the next level. The Huawei chips and graphics plagues and whatever that are coming out, will be coming out in the next few weeks and months. That's where the Chinese market is going. So we have a lot of little Trumpinos, mini Trumps in the swamp. Wow. And of course, the Zionist lobby, the number one of them all, of course, they convinced him to bomb Iran, literally, which could, depending on the Iranian answer, this could have been the beginning of World War III. It was not because the Iranians look at the big picture and I said, no, it's not now, it's later. And it may be later or it's later. And of course, this free reign that Trump 2.0 is giving to that death cult in West Asia to bomb anything they want, to take over parts of Syria, to try to destroy Lebanon for good, to rearm again to try another attack against Iran, which for them is going to be, if they try that, they're done if they try, but they will try it again. It's in the logic of the beast. That death cult is like those serial killers in cheap American movies that never die. This is the logic of that death cult. The only logic is death and serial death. And even if you are mortally wounded, you continue with trying to the logic of serial death until some force from above finally kills you. But in the end, it never does, now, because they keep resurrecting. There's got to be a season 2 or season 3 or season 4. That's the logic of Hollywood, right? So these serial killers never die. That's cult in West Asia. It's the same logic.